Kia ora whānau. Men and boys are victims of sexual abuse and violence. These crimes have been committed by male and female perpetrators. 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before their 16th birthday. Sexual abuse and violence is a human rights issue, not a gender issue. At a conference, a senior detective by the name of Mark Churches from the Auckland Child Abuse Unit said, "Last night, as you slept in the comfort of your home, thousands of children around the world and throughout New Zealand were sexually abused in what should have been their safe place. We will never know how many children have been sexually abused in this country, boys and girls. We will never know how many children are currently being sexually abused in this country as I speak to you here today. And we will never know how many children will be sexually abused as we go into New Zealand's future. But what I can tell you without a doubt, that as a society, you will get to meet some of these children. Some will end up as child prostitutes. Some will end up starring in child pornography movies. Many will rely heavily on drugs and alcohol and other addictive behaviours just to make their day more bearable. Many will end up in the mental health system and the prison system, some in both. And for those unable to live with the shame and the guilt, will take their own lives. Shame and guilt that does not belong to them, but to a society and to perpetrators who failed to protect them. Sexual abuse is a human rights issue, not a gender issue. I want you to think about the latest movie that's just been released, Spotlight, that won an Oscar award this year. I would encourage each and every one of you to go and see it. It is about the Boston Globe, the journalist in the Boston Globe who uncovered the sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests. This also happened throughout New Zealand. As you can see from this here, in 2002 at the same time, the sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests in this country was opened up. The John Jay College for Criminal Justice were commissioned by the Catholic Bishops of America to do research into the sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests, and what came out of it was 80% of victims of abuse by Catholic priests are boys. The Australian government are currently holding a royal commission into the institutional care of children. Thousands of children throughout Australia were sexually abused while in care. 2/3 of those who have come forward to speak to the Royal Commission are males. Sexual abuse is a human rights issue, not a gender issue. And until we accept this, men and boys throughout the world who have been sexually abused will continue to treat it in a manner that is both unjust and unfair. I've been very fortunate in this horrible work that I do to travel the world and meet some amazing, strong people. Men and boys who have gone through some horrendous stuff in their childhoods but have survived. In 2013, when I went to Uganda, I met several men who had been raped by the soldiers in front of their villages. Some of them had been anally penetrated by the rifles of those soldiers and were taken to hospital, to the gynecology department, where the women laughed at them and the doctors humiliated them and threw them out of the hospital. They went to the police station to complain about the atrocities they had faced and the rapes, and they were arrested for indulging in a homosexual act, because in South Africa and across Africa, homosexuality is against the law. So they were incarcerated and raped by the men there. I met some young boys who as children were forced at gunpoint to rape their mothers and their sisters and then taken away to become boy soldiers. Sexual abuse and violence is a human rights issue, not a gender issue. I would really encourage you to buckle up right at this very moment, because this is going to be a rocky road. I want to imagine when you were 12 years old what was going on in your head. This is me as a 12-year-old boy, middle child, looking for a mentor in my life, and that person came along who I thought was a mentor. He sexually violated me and raped me over a period of time, which confused my little brain. Fortunately, Alan was arrested and incarcerated. However, he was charged with 2 charges of indecent assault on a 12-year-old boy. My own country cannot even acknowledge the crime that was committed upon me. It was the rape of a 12-year-old boy, but my country says that it was an indecent assault on a 12-year-old boy. So until we get that right, things may not change. About a year after, when I started high school, well, you can imagine my little brain was quite confused. And I went to a friend's place, and an older woman in that house lured me into her sunroom. She sexually violated me, and then she wanted me to do things to her that I couldn't even comprehend. I couldn't get an erection on, so she laughed at me. And she says, "You are not even a real man." And she's right. I wasn't a real man. I was a frightened little boy that at that moment just wanted to be at home with his mother. So after that, for some reason, I decided that I was going to become a real man. So in 1967, at the ripe old age of 14, and as you can see, if you look at that, the eyes of that boy, Nigel Latta would say, "Isn't that the face of a psychopathic killer in the future?" I was expelled from high school at 14 for assaulting a teacher, and not one person stopped to ask what was going on in my head. I was out in the real world working by this stage, had access to alcohol and cigarettes. In 1981, I happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when a police officer hit me with his baton. I went from anger to rage and gave the police officer such a beating that I left him lying on the stairs at the top of the nightclub. I thought he was dead, but it didn't matter. I had absolutely no human connection to that man whatsoever. He'd got in my face, and he paid the penalty for that. He did live, which is a good story, because I may not be here to tell you this, but it didn't have any feelings towards that man. Things didn't change much over the years. In 1986, married with 2 children, earning some really good money at the freezing works, and the foreman and I got into a wee bit of a dispute, and he leaned over and he tapped me on the chin, so I smacked him twice with my left hand. I was wearing a steel mesh glove, made a wee bit of a mess of him, sat him a couple of rows back, and told him if he ever does that again, I'll kill him. Not idle words. I meant everything I said to him. In 1991, things hadn't changed much, but I stopped drinking because I knew that on alcohol I was pretty dangerous. So I stopped drinking. And I decided that I was going to become a different human being and went into looking at becoming a businessman. And a friend of mine, we were down at the hotel, sober. Game of pool came up. It was my turn. I'd had my 50 cents on the table, and everyone knows the etiquette of pool. If your name's on the table or your name's on the board, you've got your 50 cents, it's your game. I went over, another person was putting my balls and setting them up, and I mentioned it to him that it was my game. He was rather large, and he looked at me and he says, "Don't worry about it, you can have the next game." I went straight into that "don't humiliate me" mode, and I got angry. And when I said that he needed to step away from the table, he laughed at me. I got bad. I went into a place of rage. And I said, "You step away from that table, otherwise I'll knock you over, I'll throw you through that plate glass window, I will chop your head off, and I'll shove it up your ass." He looked at me, and he stepped away from the table, and he said, "You are a psychopath." And he walked away. I played my game of pool. there was no feeling of, well, that was awesome, I got that. And I went back and I sat back next to my friend, and all of a sudden I started shaking. My body was reacting in the most strangest way. For those out there who have experienced the LSD of the 70s, it was very much like that. It felt like plates of glass were going through my body. So I says to Jack, I need to go home. And I walked home. And I climbed into bed and I got into the fetal position and I cried and I cried and I cried. All of a sudden I started tossing and turning, and I had hot sweats and cold sweats. Couldn't work out what was going on in my body, and I got really scared and realised that I was a danger to society and that I was a danger to myself, and I needed to take my own life. And I contemplated how I was going to do that when there was a knock on the door. I was a single dad at that time, and I had my 2 beautiful daughters living with me. And I saw that I had something precious to live for. So I got them off to school, and I thought, what am I going to do? I need help. Where does a man go for help? Who do I ask for help? And suddenly in my brain, this little thing clicked up, Sunnyside. Sunnyside at that time was the biggest mental health institution in New Zealand, which was not far away from my home. So I thought, I'll go there. And I got showered and I got shaved and I got dressed. I made myself look really respectable, and I went out there. And when I got there, I was really feeling useless and hopeless, a failed human being, especially being supposed to be a tough, staunch man. And I walked in and there were 4 people mulling around this desk. And they looked me up and down as though I was a dog turd on the bottom of their shoes, which really didn't help how I was feeling. And one fella looked at me and he says, can I help you? And I said, I certainly hope so. I said, last night I threatened to kill a man over a game of pool, and today I want to take my own life. And he said, you've done neither. I said, no. He says, we can't help you. So I have to ask myself, can't help, won't help, unable to help, not allowed to help. And I walked out of there. And outside, the sun was shining, but I was in this glass cage, and there was a black cloud above my head. But I saw the vision of my 2 beautiful daughters. So I went to another building, and another building, and another building, and each and every one of them said the same thing: we can't help you. Man, asking for help. How many times have we heard men don't ask for help? I asked for help and I got turned away. The last building I was in, it was a little prefab type place, and there was a woman sitting in the corner on a typewriter. For you younger people, you can Google that. She looked up at me, and I don't even remember telling her the story. I was that numb by this stage and frightened. And she looked up at me and she says, you need help, buddy. I said, yes, I do. She said, you won't get it here. I said, what will I do? She said, would you go to psych emergency? And I said, yes, I would. I had no idea what psych emergency was, but what I do know is that woman was prepared to offer me something. So she explained what it was, and I got in my car and I drove and I met a psychologist, and I spent an hour in the room with that psychologist crying. I told him about my life, the violence, the anger, the hatred that I had inside me, that I just wanted to kill people. And I told him about the sexual abuse I suffered as a 12-year-old boy. He says to me, I can help you with your anger, but he says, I cannot help you with the sexual abuse. You'll need to get specialist help for that. So what's happened, I ended up getting specialist help, and I came across a support group. I've been running support groups now for a wee while, and I want to tell you the power of those support groups, men helping men connecting with men. There was a police officer, there was a teacher, there was a mongrel mob member, there was a white power member, there was a prison officer, there was a man who had barely been out of prison for 3 weeks sitting there. And we're in the room talking about how things were emotional in the circle. And it got to the police officer's turn. And he started talking about how he had been triggered by something that had happened that week, and it took him back to when he was 4 years old and been raped, and he started crying. The man who had barely been out of prison got up, picked up the tissues, walked over, handed the tissues to the police officer, touched him on the arm and says, we're here for you. That's a connection. As we were leaving, it was pouring down with rain. And the white power member was walking towards the door, and the mongrel mob bloke says, "How are you getting home, bro?" He says, "I'm walking." He says, "Not in this weather, I'll take you home." Connections. Human beings connecting from a vulnerable, emotional place. Very powerful. That's the work I've been doing for the last 20 years. I genuinely believe that sexual violence is a human rights issue, not a gender issue. And until we, as a society, get that right, it will be a human wrong. Tui I runga, tui I raro, tui I waho, tui I rora, tui teri tangata, ka runga te pō, ka runga te ā, homi e, hui e, taiki e. In the spirit that brings us together today in this beautiful place, in the knowledge that we share with each other, as we look into the darkness to go into the light, then, and only then, can we all come together as one. Thank you.